I guess this is a great follow-up to the last talk. Maybe a different approach to view how we get teams to work together, but hey, I very much appreciate that. Inspiring as well, so thank you. But yeah, this talk, here's a bit of the agenda I'll go through. A bit of an introduction, what and why, who's involved, where we are, a bit about Fabric, and then some roadmap and focus, and some areas around how we can get L2s and the L1 to work together in a positive some way. I stole some of these slides and ideas, so thanks to, I guess, M-Team, Spire, and the Puffer guys. So just a bit of introduction. Working on two public good efforts. One's called Commit Boost, which is the sidecar that allows Ethereum L1 validators to issue proposer commitments, which includes pre-confirmations. Ideally, they're used for based rollups, but I'm sure there will be more use cases for that. And then also on the back of that, Tangential later last year started this effort called Fabric, which is an effort to identify and then code up, and then the harder part, the social layer, get people to use some standards around base sequencing. And I'll go through some of those details. But before that, I didn't realize Cecilia was going to go through her extensive sort of slides on how base rollups work, but I will do my best to give a different perspective maybe. This is some wording by Justin Drake. Tried to put the summary, but in essence, what I'll call classical rollups have a centralized sequencer. The main idea is base sequencing is to get rid of that classical rollup centralized sequencer and use Ethereum L1 proposers. And that is what makes you a based rollup. And there's various reasons, which I'll go through on why you'd want to do that. Man, you were so much good with this remote. There we go. Okay, so what is a based rollup? This is a great graphic. I think this came from M-Team, but here's a progression. He calls it centralized sequencers. I'll call it classical rollups. A little more PC, I guess. And then shared sequencing, which in my view, Espresso will be happy to hear this, is really important for a specific reason, which I'll go through. And then all the way to the right, you have base sequencing, and you'll notice the transactions are going through. Shared sequencing is a couple nodes. Probably the centralized sequencing is one entity, and then base sequencing is the million plus validators of Ethereum. This is another view, a little bit inaccurate, but stole it anyways. It's one structure of how a based rollup can work. This isn't the canonical and only way we'll see this happen. And so just to follow the user flow, you have the user who, it's kind of rude, kind of looks like a nerd. Maybe we should have made him like a normal person that's using a blockchain, but sending a transaction that, I'm skipping over a lot of details, but makes its way to the Ethereum proposer, which then sequences it within the L1 block, ideally alongside other transactions from other rollups that are also based. And that is kind of the overarching flow. In a normal L2, you kind of just have the user and the centralized rollup, and then they take that and they post potentially something to Ethereum, maybe not, other LTAs. One of the other nuances here is, if you think about the transactions making its way to the Ethereum validator, there's only so fast you can go to have settlement, which in Ethereum is 12 seconds. And so this is a terrible UX that actually is fine for some based rollup use cases. Name chain is one of those where your ENS domain probably doesn't need to be on speed running here. And so we've come up with this idea called a pre-confirmation. And pre-confirmations have been around for a long time in L2s. You see them. It's just a centralized sequencer issuing those. So from a user perspective, you hit, I don't know, trade on ZK sync, I'll give them a little chill, and immediately back your wallet shows, hey, this has happened, or within some period of time. It's quite quick. We're trying to provide the same thing in base sequencing. And so what happens is ahead of time, a proposer will offer a pre-confirmation or the confirmation that in the future, when I'm proposing a block, I will include this transaction. And so you can provide the user on the L2 instantaneous quote unquote settlement. And what's backing it is not cryptography, it's some trust, admitting that, but also some economic guarantees that if a bad actor or an actor that acts maliciously or doesn't do something right, there's some economic value that goes back to the user. And so at a high level, this is based rollups. Just want to emphasize again, pre-confs are not required, but certainly from a UX perspective, they're very needed. And there's been a lot of controversy about around base rollups, but now I'm devoting part of my life to it. So why do we continue to push this? Currently, L2s are not interoperable with each other. I think it's important. Some of the bad rap base rollups have gotten is because there was a lot of hand waving saying we're going to solve all the interoperability. Simply not true. We need other tools, which I'll get into. And in particular for base rollups, for L2 to L2 composability, you need real-time proving, which we simply do not have. And so I am a big supporter of other things you mentioned, but other efforts to get cross rollup interactions. But and another solution to help chill Espresso is that's one of those where you can have L2 to L2 composability. But one of the downsides, not only of Intense in some ways, but somewhat with Espresso, unless they also become a base shared sequencer, is you need interoperability with the L1. That's one of the key things. And like my personal belief is, in the long run, the largest and most important assets are going to be issued in a network that is the safest and most neutral. And my background is I worked at a hedge fund and Goldman on crypto, and I always thought what we do is have our own rollup. And even in the context of trying to get stablecoins stood up, where we'd have like a stablecoin that JP Morgan would accept, that BNY would accept, and there's huge use cases around why you'd want this money to move very quickly. Issuing a stablecoin in a Goldman rollup doesn't work for JP Morgan. Issuing JPM coin in their JPM rollup really doesn't work for Goldman. And so the ideal place is you have the L1 that is this neutral layer that you can trust. There'll be some like compliance around these stablecoins, but at least then you have the Goldman rollup that can interop with the L1 neutral bank coin with the JPM. And that's kind of one of the important things. And so I don't want to be up here saying base rollups solve everything. They certainly don't. You need other tools, and I'll get into a few of those things in the next slide as well. But definitely L2 to L2 interop, it just doesn't solve it in the near term. We want developers to see there's one chain, and just had a great talk. The other thing that you've heard a lot about is value accrual back to ETH. I actually like M-Team's quote here where I don't, maybe some people view it that way, but I think this is more about what can your L1 do for you, not what you can do for your L1. And it's kind of my North Star as I think through these things and hold myself accountable. These are kind of some pictures around why to pursue this. Again, Spire created this slide, appreciate them, but you're able to leverage things from the L1 like the Oracle. So when you launch a base rollup, you don't have to go to Jeremy Malaire and say, hey, give me your USDC. You can tap into the L1. If there's an Oracle on L1, you can tap into it. And so as you're launching your rollup with your own specific use cases, it's just much easier to get it going. That's one of the benefits. And then just network effects. How base rollups work is the more base rollups there are, the more networks effects there are amongst the base rollups. And so there's clear benefits from that versus your own sort of walled garden. Like I said, base rollups are cool. Other things are needed. One of the things is what Josh is driving. People ask, Fabric and Commit Boost is an EF-backed effort. And so like, what's the difference between what Josh does and what Fabric is doing? Basically, Fabric is tackling the sequencing, and I see Josh tackling a lot of the stuff down the stack or up the stack, depending how you view it. And so, how inbox contracts interact, addresses standards, like things like that. This is where Josh is leaning in. So they're actually really complementary to each other. And for base rollups to really thrive, we need other stuff like shared deposits, shared blobs, shared proving, all these things that are listed here. So who is working on base rollups? And this will lead into why we started Fabric, and the time is now to do that. Cecilia kind of stole this, but how it started, this was probably a year ago, almost the date. Some of the teams that are in here were there. How it's going now, as you can see, the symbols are shrinking. It's harder to fit them. And frankly, this was made probably 4 weeks ago by Justin Drake, and it's way out of date. So where are we? Base rollups started really about a year ago. Research and development has happened. People have a good sense, at least a path on how to get there. Certainly not ready for production yet. I couldn't go to ZK Sync and say, hey, you should be based. Here's an implementation you can look at to see all the nuances. It just isn't there yet. But we've gotten to a place where we at least understand the challenges and we have some solutions in place. So that's one thing. And then we have 2 base rollups that are live. Still a lot to be done there, which is good. Restating that in different form. The other thing I'll say is that we've been fortunate enough to have a lot of L2s launch, and 4 or 5 years ago when they got started, they didn't know what they didn't know. but now we know a lot about what they didn't know. And I'll get into this a bit about Fabric, but that's really important. So we have one side of the coin where based rollups have matured to some place. There's still a ton of work to do. The other side where we're able to look across various implementations of L2s and pick design decisions that maybe they wish they wouldn't have made and optimize for that on the go forward. And so the last thing I'll say is that with based rollups in particular, because they're using Ethereum as the sequencer, commoditization of a stack is very natural. If you're sharing a big portion of what some L2s use as their customization, then, and it's Ethereum, it's a very natural thing to have more of that as a public good, more of that maybe not being monetized, these types of things. And so it lends itself naturally to what I'll get into, which is Fabric, which is it's a fully public good, nonprofit, helping to build a reference implementation. And so that's a sign. And give a shout to the meme that everyone mentions every first call we have. But if you haven't seen this, then yeah, I guess we're just creating the 14th standard or 15th. So yeah, a bit about Fabric. There's two use cases that we're targeting. Number one, we want to get, or at least create a path for current L2s to become based if they so choose, or at least not give them an excuse to say, oh, we don't know how this would work, so we're not going to do it. So we'll at least get that going, which I think is important. And number two, helping people who want to launch a base rollup do that faster. And Fabric, it's not a nonprofit. There's no monetization, no token. It's purely a very minimal viable implementation that people can leverage, and we'll standardize around that. I fully expect there are going to be teams that build businesses around customizing this, optimizing this, providing whoever wants what, but hopefully using this standard so that they can all interact together. So this is a bit about its goals, somewhat stated this, but minimal viable implementation. We're not trying to compete with people, just getting something out there. And yeah. As Talk said, I couldn't have planned this better. This is less a technical issue and it's mostly a human issue. And the other project I worked on was called Commit Boost. When we started that, there were essentially, I would say, 4 or 5 different forks of MetBoost that were in place already, which was already causing issues amongst the network. But then as proposer commitments were being raised, each team was pursuing their own sidecar. And so what we're gearing towards was a world where validators would have to make a choice between 10 different sidecars, which there's a huge vendor lock-in. There's a lot of issues with that. Basically, over the last year, what we've gotten to is every team is building on top of Commit Boost. Most of the validators see the benefits to it, and they're pushing to convert from MetBoost to Commit Boost. And so this has been like one of the journeys that I quit my job for. Again, this is a nonprofit public good, and we had success there, so we're hoping to repeat it within Fabric. And off to a good start. Here's an overview of Fabric. The green boxes at the top is where we plan to focus. The white boxes in particular, we are absolutely not touching. And then there's some stretch goals which we think are incredibly ambitious to get done due to the human coordination and some technical changes that would need to happen. I'm not going to go through all these things. We have a paper on this, and I'm more than happy to meet with everyone. We also have an incredibly detailed roadmap around how this would work, which we'd love to get more feedback and thoughts around. But like I said, some of these boxes do impact L2s today. So some of this is massaging the teams or working with them to say, okay, this may make sense for me to adjust, for instance, my derivation so that this can work. And these are some of the challenges that we're up against across that. This is a bit about our priorities. Again, I'm not going to go through this in excruciating detail, but just want to emphasize when we began this, there wasn't even a picture of a based rollup stack. Like we were trying to find something, okay, how can we show people what this looks like? It really didn't exist. And so we, at least on the last slide, you saw some of that. And then what we did is we went through each of the components. We asked ourselves, does this make sense to be a public good? Does this make sense to be a standard? Is there already a team working on this? If it is, okay, great, we'll take it. And that's how we created our roadmap. And the last thing was like, is this contentious? And so at the top, we're starting with things that are more L1 centric for pre-confirmations, and then slowly making our way to things that are more contentious that impact L2s. And that's how we structured this. And so one of the examples I'll give is blob sharing. Nethermind got an EF grant. They're working on blob sharing. We're not going to work on blob sharing, and we'll use their output. This is a bit about some of the teams that are supporting Fabric. Many of them are in the room. There's others that didn't want to be listed yet, or I just couldn't fit them on the slide. And so we don't have all the major rollups yet that are bought in. Certainly we have people like Tycho, Rise, which is another base rollup, mostly all the base rollup teams, and then even teams like Scroll that are interested in becoming this. And the way I view it is there's a spectrum of rollups. There's some that are never going to be based, which is fine. There's some that are open to being based if they saw something working. There are some that say, hey, based is cool. We're willing to fund people to adjust our stack to become based. And there's teams that are like, oh, we're absolutely being based. And so we're working alongside at least the ones that are more open to it today and working on the others. So with that, I'll say thanks. Here you can read the ETH research post and we'll have more coming. Thank you. Yeah, some of this will actually be managed through pre-confirmations. And so, yeah, again, come from TradFi. So I have this very commodity market type perspective. So a rollup consumes a commodity, which is like Ethereum DA in some cases, just like airlines consume oil. And so how I eventually imagine this will happen is there's going to be this market around pre-confirmations, and rollups will have like a, I don't know if it's a trading team, but algorithms around optimizations of when to pre-buy gas and when to let the market determine that. And I think it's the Linea team that is particularly focused on their optimizations and how they batch, and then when they purchase gas to post DA. So that's how I imagine some of it to go. But one of the things that based rollups, someone's going to have to figure out is like the data compression and the things that L2s do that is going to inherently, like, base rollups are always going to be more expensive if you can't optimize that piece. And I think there's people aware of it. I don't know if there's a solution yet for that, but there was a great workshop with Ed Felton, who obviously Arbitrum have worked a ton on this, and he just hammered that into people. So I know people are focused on it, but it's not solved yet. Go ahead.
Well, I appreciate the TradFi background that applies to this space. It's moving so quickly now with all the different players. A couple of those priorities, what's the rough timeline on getting some of this figured out?
Yeah, I should have kept the slide up, but the top portion of that for the L1 stack, so the pre-confirmation pipeline, which is extending current PBS pipeline to allow for pre-confirmations to be issued, and then part of the block that the builder construction passes to the relay, those are pretty much finalized. There's this registry contract that we have in place that's getting audited, and what that's intended to do is it's one place validators register to, and then L2s can read from. So that part is getting knocked out. Everyone that's building pre-comps has agreed to use it. The L2 stuff, I expect us to really kick things off probably in a couple weeks. What we've been basically working on is just looking across each L2 stack, each base stack, finding out how they do different things like derivation, inbox contracts, mapping out all those differences, seeing where there's overlap, and then seeing what's the best path for a base sequencing stack that we think people could get agreed to. And that just takes time. And then, yeah, you have to meet with all the teams in addition to that. So by the end of this year, hopefully we're about halfway down that page, basically, with people actually inventing it. I think, yeah, the top portion, things will be running live in Q2. As we get further down, end of year to about 3/4, and that bottom portion is still pretty ambitious. I appreciate that, yeah. Yeah, one of the other major feedback we got was just education. Again, you can't find a base rollup stack. So Tim Bako actually purchased baserollup.org. So we're taking the URL and we're going to attach just anyone who didn't know base rollups, they can look at it and understand it too. So things like that, we're going to knock out.
I might not be understanding, but you didn't talk about it. You mentioned the proposer against them, but it's really the gateway.
Yeah, in most of the models today, there's a delegation mechanism, and this is a controversial topic. And even commit boost perspective, and I think Vitalik would strongly agree with me. The most important thing for Ethereum is the decentralized validator set, and you must protect that at all costs. Pre-confirmations are it's a sophisticated thing. You're pricing the pre-conf, you're getting hit by a bunch of DDoS because you're having to issue the pre-confs. Like users are requesting this. It's a DevOps nightmare. Most solo stakers and even sophisticated proposers can't do this. And so the reason for the gateway is to abstract that, similar to what we see in the PBS pipeline today. You have the builder constructing the block on behalf of the proposer to participate in MEV. And so it is a centralization vector. I am optimistic that there are gateways like even BuilderNet. There are teams working on certain types of auction mechanisms. But I think initially people are going to be pragmatic. You heard Tycho say it earlier. They're going to go with a couple providers that are gateways, and we'll see what happens. And then I will say the teams that have built gateways, they have it open source. So Gattaca was the first to open source their gateway. There's about 4 others coming. So then we'll at least have some ability for people to pick that code up and then try to compete. But there's still like DevOps overhead and some other things that people are going to have to compete on for sure.